Welcome, everyone. I'm Adrian Adams, the nutritionist and naturopath at Fugen Health, and we're going to be hosting today a Ask Me Anything about my clinical experience that was relevant to your health. So we're going to go through lots of questions that have come through to the community, and I've got my colleague Carly here, Carly Russell-White, who's also a nutritionist and naturopath, who's going to be asking these questions and using her expertise to create a rich discussion. So let's get into it.
Amazing. Hi. Okay. So first up, that's commonly asked in your clinical experience, what is the most commonly missed root cause of brain fog?
The most commonly missed cause of brain fog is either a deficiency or a blood glucose regulation issue. So when we go through, let's say patients come in, they said, I've got brain fog. I'd be asking them questions about other things that could be related to one of those mechanisms. So let's say, do you bruise easily? Do you have naps that you can't control? You're on a bus and you're out. Yeah. What I'm fishing around for there is essentially an iron deficiency. Yeah. Because that could be the root cause to their brain fog. And they downplay the other symptoms because, let's say, they've got a career and it uses their brain as their predominant thing and they really value that. Well, I'll mention brain fog first. Yeah. But they're falling asleep in the afternoon and smashing down Mars bars to kind of stay awake.
Yeah.
So that's one. Another one that I'd be looking at is the fact of, well, let's say go through that blood sugar regulation issue. So that could overlap with some of those symptoms. So let's say the 3 p.m. energy crash in the office could relate to a blood sugar instability. We could also have night sweats at night, and they're not menopausal. They could be a man. And you're finding reasons for them to go dip into hyperglycemic events or low blood sugar events. The brain does not like that. It finds it very stressful, and it could be like seeing through a fog there. And it can also create things of where you can get quite anxious, quite stressed, and feel overwhelmed a lot. So there's some other symptoms that I'd be looking for as well. So yeah, you can kind of see there's a multifactorial aspect to brain fog. Another one that does come up, especially in my community, is like allergies and toxins are some important ones as well. So you'll find I moved to a certain house and they didn't correlate it to the fact that, oh yeah, that's actually when my brain fog started. So yeah, that's another one. The other one which one did I mention there? There was
Blood sugar,
toxins. And then we had, what I'll mention to the list is hormonal factors. So if we're discussing women, you'll find that their brain fog has a pattern to it. So you'll go, wait a minute, where's your brain fog the worst? And they'll go, oh, probably every 2 weeks. And you're like, oh, okay, well, where in your cycle are you? So hopefully that woman is tracking their cycle and they can kind of look into their app. And then they'll go, oh, whoops, didn't see that correlation there. So it'll be from ovulation through to the end of menses or a period. And then they have what we call the good week and they're okay. Yeah. So that's some other areas that can affect brain fog. So it's quite complex. Brain fog is considered by most people that don't have a health background as there must be some single thing there that it's caused by. Yeah. But not really. And it's not really a diagnostic symptom either. So it's certainly real. You're not making it up in your brain. But it's really just a reflection of the brain not being able to function optimally. And then your cognitive function declines. And a lot of people describe it as brain fog.
Yes. Nice. And I guess with that not being a diagnostic tool, what are you looking at in terms of functional testing or pathology?
Yeah, so let's go through some of those core reasons and why. So we'd be running iron studies tests for iron deficiencies. We'd be using continuous glucose monitors to see that we've got those patterns discovered of where they're going really low, or they've got lots of instabilities at nighttime and causing sleep disruptions, or the night sweats I mentioned before. And also, just a quick side note, if you're getting really bad sleep due to blood sugar disturbances or another factor, let's say sleep apnea, sleep is essential to the brain. So the brain don't function if you're underslept very well. That could curtail if I was suspecting sleep apnea, or referral to get someone to get a sleep study, hopefully the more comfortable ones done at home. Then we'd be looking at, more on the history side of stuff. So if we were suspecting a toxin, like I mentioned before, there's two main areas that would be affecting brain fog. It's mold contamination. So we'd be more looking into the history of the home or exposures to water damage and things like that, or visible mold. We'd also be looking into allergies, or the health of their house with pets and carpet and etc. If we're looking at heavy metals as a toxin, we can run urine, blood, and hair testing to find if there's, let's say, here in the kind of Greater Sydney region, the Central Coast, we've got a lot of lead exposure from our rubbish paints that we used in the 80s and 70s and 60s and 50s. Until they were banned. So lead is a common toxin that we find. And then you have the second common one, which is mercury.
Okay, great. So how quickly can brain fog improve when the root driver is addressed?
So it depends on the root driver, of course. So let's say if I pick on the first one I mentioned, which is iron deficiency. If someone comes and I suspect iron deficiency, we test an iron studies, which is a blood test. It depends on what we'll find there. So the most average one is we'd find a ferritin of 30. Doctors generally would be okay with that until it went to 15. I wouldn't, because it's more than likely contributing to symptoms. It's not an optimal level of iron storage. So we'd be looking at optimal being 100 on the ferritin side. So depending on where you are, we'd start on iron supplementation, increasing iron stores with via dietary measures as well. And we'd be looking at least 3 months before we're starting to see some optimization of iron levels. A lot of the time, though, people start subjectively feeling better along that entire journey. So it's more of how you'd interpret the feeling of getting your iron back on board on the brain fog. It's almost like you can just, every week as you go through that 3-month period, you're starting to see more and more through that fog. Yeah. If we look at blood glucose disturbances, most of the time we can get that done within the month. So we can get the dietary practice that's high in protein with regular timed meals and sleep enhancement from that all coming together. And within that month, we can start to see some serious improvements. Yeah.
Do you want to touch on why someone's blood sugar could possibly be low and what that would feel like and look like?
Yeah, so full-on hypoglycemia will feel like you're cold, clammy, panicky. You can get headaches or migraines triggered. You're generally hungry or nauseated or both. Yeah, you're kind of in a bit of a panic. The brain really hates having low blood sugar. It's essentially fundamental to brain function. So panics, releases adrenaline, a big mess kind of occurs. So a lot of the times this can create panic attacks in susceptible individuals as well. The more milder versions of low blood glucose or hypoglycemia are essentially, you've got your brain fog symptom, you have the hangry symptom, which is not really an official symptom, but you're hungry and you've got a mood disturbance as well. You get kind of like really annoyed at people for no apparent reason, and then you eat and you feel fine. Yeah. And then, you've got waking during the night is the main one.
Is there a certain time for waking?
Yes. So generally you'll find, and we can see this in glucose monitors, we'll see the fact that you'll have stable blood glucose or somewhat stable blood glucose up to about between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. it'll falter. Yeah. And then you'll see a dip. You see all these little red marks in the graph. You'll ask the patient, go, hey, did you register those? They either tell me I had a nightmare, I woke up sweaty, or I woke up in a panic, or I just woke up. And then they may find it difficult to fall asleep, or they don't. But yeah, if you're running a continuous glucose monitor, you'll find the fact that, okay, yeah, that's low blood sugar.
And with glucose monitoring, how often do you use that in clinic or feel the need to use that for your patients?
We would use it. So sometimes we'll find the symptoms are so obvious, we can just save the cost and the work to do the monitoring. And almost the treatment is the test. So if I put this in, it should balance blood sugar and it will solve that problem. So we have that strategy to do. But in some circumstances, I'm a bit unsure as a practitioner. And I'm like, I'd really like to advocate to get a continuous glucose monitor, put the patient through the expense and put the patient through the, just a little bit of extra work and monitoring. Devices these days are really cool. They'll kind of sync all the data through to me automatically. And I can have a look at it and either confirm or not confirm my theory about the blood glucose.
Okay, great. So do you see more insulin-related brain fog or inflammation-driven brain fog?
Yeah, okay. So the insulin-related brain fog is more on, let's say we've got a patient who's insulin resistant, meaning they overproduce insulin to keep their blood sugars low due to a decrease in sensitivity on their tissues. Like actual practice creates a lot of inflammatory processes too. So there's not too much separation between those. So we'll find an individual who's insulin resistant, and then we find they're also extremely inflamed, and generally, they'll have the trio of being extremely stressed as well. So all of that is an absolute disaster with regulation of any system within the body, including blood glucose. Because a lot of the times, insulin-resistant individual will overcompensate with their food choices. They generally go, I love carbs, and I totally believe them. So they'll have either lots of sugary treats or they love the salty, savory things and smashing down sourdoughs everywhere. That is, in essence, they've got a blood glucose problem that triggers their love of carbohydrates. They overconsume them, and then they get these huge peaks and these huge troughs in their blood sugar. And then that just drives their weight gain, and then it drives their insulin resistance to accumulate in there. And then I tell patients that insulin is a double-edged sword. So super, super important. Without it, we have type 1 diabetes or insulin-dependent type 2 diabetes, so that's serious disease. But in excess, it can create excessive inflammatory responses, which can be felt as weight gain being inflammatory, but also the brain fog that you alluded to there, as well as, joint inflammations, skin inflammations, lots of different areas.
Okay, great. I think that really helps answer questions for the community. Looking forward to our next one.
Cool. Thanks, Carly. Great discussion. So what we'll do is we'll keep listing lots of questions that come through from the community, like Carly said just then. If you want to get started on something in your health immediately, take our 4-minute health questionnaire, links just below. Please feel free to do that. You'll get a personalized report at the end and you can get started on something. Now, if you want to learn more about your health in some specific areas that aren't related to anything we went through today, just tour through the channel or watch this video just up here, and please enjoy that and learn more about how you can optimize your health and go beyond disease-free. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.